In 1908, Britain controlled 56% of the world's total submarine telegraph cables. It came as no surprise to anybody that as soon as the war broke out, they cut the little undersea cable that Germany possessed. The Germans had been expecting this, and they had already communicating with their colonies using radio. As Admiral Fisher observed, you cannot cut the air. Radio was one of the new inventions that had come out of the period of rapid technological change at the end of the Victorian era. Marconi demonstrated his invention to the public in early summer of 1896, and then gave another private demonstration to the British Army and the Royal Navy on Salisbury Plain a few months later. The Royal Navy immediately saw how important this new technology was going to be. On the 24th of July 1903, it signed an agreement with the Marconi Company for the use of their patents. From 1908 onwards, all new battle cruisers entering service were fitted with high-powered Marconi sets as standard. This revolutionized the way that information was gathered and distributed. A captain would no longer lose touch with the rest of his squadron. It meant that virtual abolition of independent action in favour of fighting as part of a larger, more powerful unit organised using wireless. But some units assumed that remote authority knew better, and they failed to exercise initiative. With all these messages floating through the air, it became important to capture them. This was the responsibility of the Director of Naval Intelligence. Naval Intelligence created a code-breaking team that was initially located in Room 40 of the Admiralty. Without these code-breakers, there would have been no Battle of Jutland. After the success of the Battle of Heligoland Bight, the job of Director of Naval Intelligence was given to Captain, later Rear Admiral Sir William Reginald Hall. During his time as captain of Queen Mary, he had managed to reduce crime on board the ship to an unheard of minimum by abolishing the ship's police. The job of cracking the German codes was given to the former Director of Naval Education. Sir Alfred Ewing was a short, thick-set man with keen blue eyes and shaggy eyebrows. Some of his staff developed an uncanny degree of skill for breaking the German ciphers. As early as the 20th of December 1914, just 5 months into the war, he was able to tell Admiral Fisher that they could now read the 3 principal codes used by the Germans. They continued to do this all the way through till 1916. The first German codebook fell into Allied hands in the first week of the war. On August 11th, the German steamship Hobart was seized off Melbourne. The captain tried to get rid of his confidential documents, but the sailors got him before he could destroy his codebook. This book was known as the HVB and was intended for communications between German warships and merchantmen. That same month, a German light cruiser, the SMS Magdeburg, ran aground on the coast of Estonia in dense fog. The first officer ordered his men to abandon ship. One of the signalmen grabbed the codebook, a massive tome, 15 inches long, 12 inches wide, and 6 inches thick, and jumped over the side. After the war, Ewing would write that the Russians had found it still clasped in the arms of the drowned signalman. The truth is a little less romantic. The British copy had been found warm and dry in the captain's safe when a German naval lieutenant broke into it. 2 months later, it was in Ewing's hands, along with its related charts. This was the chief signal book of the German Navy, known as the SKM. They should have changed it as soon as they knew about the loss of Magdeburg, but as the admiral in command of the squadron had dutifully reported that the codebook had been destroyed, they continued to use it up until May 1917. Between the SKM and the HVB, the cryptanalysts had plenty to work with. They set up shop in room 40 of the old Admiralty building. This was on the same corridor as the First Sea Lord's office, and looked over the inner courtyard. By the end of the war, they would have decoded 20,000 German messages, including the notorious Zimmermann telegram. They soon found that the SKM would also allow them to prize secrets out of the third German codes, known as the VB, as this was primarily intended for cable communications between warships overseas or embassies. Then, on November 30th, a British fishing trawler pulled up something particularly valuable to the war efforts in its nets. This was a chest that had been thrown overboard by the destroyer S-119. It had lain on the seabed for 6 weeks but inside it contained a complete codebook for the VB. The British now had the full codebooks for the 3 main German ciphers. What Room 40 could do was one of the most closely guarded secrets of the war, and they went to great lengths to cover their tracks when using the material. For months, its existence was known only to Jellicoe, Beatty and Churchill. Jellicoe didn't like the extra time that this would cost him, and pleaded to have the intercepted codes sent directly to decoding staff aboard his flagship. When Churchill heard that he had sent this request in a lower level Royal Navy code, he was furious. He was worried that this might have leaked their secret. He did not have to worry. The Germans refused to believe that the British had broken their codes. They thought the British must have female agents who were using their wiles on susceptible officers of the fleet. As late as 1917, one airship radio operator insisted that the British operate a high-powered radio station near Hamburg that send messages when Zeppelins took off. The British did have some agents in Germany, but nothing close to how many the Germans thought they had. The Germans had built an extensive spy network inside Britain. Unfortunately for them, the British knew about it. They deliberately left it in place right up until the outbreak of the war, and then scooped them all up. The Germans would eventually replace the SKM that the British had got from the Magdeburg, but even this could not keep the British out of their communications network for long. In September of 1916, the German Zeppelin L-32 was shot down near London. Soldiers searching through the smouldering remains found a charred, but still usable, copy of the new German signal boot in the smashed forward gondola. This absolutely should not have been there. Admiral Philipp, the chief of the German Naval Air Forces, had explicitly ordered all of their important codebooks to be left back in Germany and to take only the HSV, which the Germans already knew was compromised. The British were not just using their wireless listening posts for collecting German messages. The previous Director of Naval Intelligence, Admiral Henry Oliver, had set up directional wireless stations from the Orkneys to Kent. There were enough of them ensuring that any wireless signal would find at least 2 listening stations tuned to receive it, allowing them to triangulate the sender's position. Stations were manned by men of the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve Shore Wireless Service. These men had originally been civilian radio operators, but kept getting taunted by people who thought that they should have been at the front. So, with a stroke of the Admiralty pen, they were all converted into members of the Royal Navy Volunteer Reserve. After they got their new Navy uniforms, they no longer had to worry about having a white feather thrust in their faces and could concentrate on passing information back to the Admiralty along private telegraph wires. Room 40 had soon worked out all the call signs from the German fleet. Between that and the directional stations, they were able to track their movements across the North Sea. During both the raid on Scarborough and the Battle of Dogger Bank, Room 40 was able to tell the fleet exactly where to go looking for the Germans. This made surprising the Grand Fleet difficult, as the British always had prior warning of their intentions. Room 40 had been peeking into Shears's plans for Jutland since May the 17th. They even had the message containing the exact time the fleet would leave the Jade, but this was not decoded until the day after the battle, as it had been sent in an entirely new cipher. The first messages that they could decode hinted that there was a major operation underway, were the orders for a large amount of minesweeping around the exits to the German minefields. The Admiralty passed the information that they had up to Scapa Flow and Rosyth using the telegraph. The British fleets were already raising steam 15 minutes before the Germans had even left their anchorage. But it is here that we meet the first major intelligence failure on the British side. Captain Thomas Jackson was the Director of Operations Division of the Admiralty. He barged into Room 40 and demanded to know why the directional wireless stations placed the call sign DK. Jackson was not well liked. He had only been to Room 40 twice before, both times to complain. He made no secret of his contempt for the gifted civilians who ran Room 40 and believed that they could not possibly understand the implications of all the intercepted signals. The cryptographers described him as a ridiculous, angry, blustering buffoon and found him insufferable. The men in Room 40 told him, correctly, that DK was currently in Wilhelmshaven. And it was. At that moment, the call sign DK was being used by the wireless station at the entrance of Wilhelmshaven. There is a little confusion as to whether Riem 40 knew that it had swapped its call sign with the German flagship Frederick de Grosser or not, but it is certain Captain Jackson didn't. He strode out of Room 40 convinced that the German flagship was still at anchor and passed the information on to Jellicoe. This led to him believing that only the German battlecruisers were at sea. So, when he received news from Beatty that he was within sight of the entire German high seas fleet, he lost confidence in the information coming from the Admiralty. The British were not the only ones with radio interception stations. The Germans never reached the same level of penetration as Room 40, but they were able to tell Scheer that either 2 British dreadnoughts or 2 groups of dreadnoughts had left Scapa Flow. Scheer considered this information to be too vague to be useful. She had an entire picket line of submarines looking for the British fleets, but they were not providing with much in the way of useful intelligence. He also used airships for reconnaissance. His inability to get an airship over Sunderland had been the reason why the target for the raid had been changed to the Skagerrak near Jutland. There were 3 airships in the vicinity of the High Seas Fleet, L-14, L-21 and L-23, but as it was a misty day, compounded by all the smoke from the coal-burning warships, even L-14, cruising overhead, could not see much. The British also used aircraft for reconnaissance. The Grand Fleet had left in such a rush that they had left their seaplane carrier behind. However, the little seaplane carrier HMS Engadine managed to keep up with the battlecruisers. Just before 3:10, Flight Lieutenant Frederick Rutland took off in his short Type 184 floatplane, accompanied by his observer, Assistant Paymaster George S. Truitt. The conditions were far from ideal, but Rutland and Truitt came under intense fire from the German light cruisers. She gave messages back to Engadine. After about half an hour in the air, one of the oil pipes burst. Rutland managed to coast the plane down, and it was hit 7 times and would later be recovered by Engadine. The men sat behind 2 tiny desks in the wireless cabin of HMS Lion never received any message passed onwards to them. Lion might not have been able to make out Truitt's signals, but this was not through any fault of the signalmen, who kept repairing their equipment even as the battle raged around them. Chief Petty Officer Telegraphist McAvoy would be awarded the Conspicuous Gallantry Medal, as he had to repair the main aerial 4 times during the battle. One young telegraphist was sent up the rigging to work on the aerials with shells whistling overhead and shrapnel bursting all around. But even when they were below decks, the smoke was at times so thick they had to work by touch alone. Beatty was so immersed in his fight with the German battlecruisers that he sent barely any information onwards. He had not been the only one. With the exception of Goodenough, most of the flotilla commanders did not feel any responsibility to relay information to their commander-in-chief. Jellicoe found himself decidedly uninformed about the first part of the battle. When the Grand Fleet burst out from the mist, the first question that Jellicoe flashed to Beatty by searchline was, "Where is the enemy's battle fleet?" If Jellicoe had been in a bad situation, Scheer was in a worse one. His flag lieutenant bluntly declared after the war that Scheer had only the foggiest idea about what was happening. Jellicoe at least knew the rough position of the High Seas Fleet, while Scheer did not even know the Grand Fleet was at sea. The second great intelligence blunder of the day came that night. Scheer put out a signal with his course and speed, and then asked for airship reconnaissance of Horn's Reef. Both of these messages were intercepted and decoded within 15 minutes. They would have told Jellicoe precisely what Scheer intended if they had been passed on. Another signal to the commodore of all the German destroyers, ordering him to assemble his flotillas at Horn's Reef, confirmed it. In total, 16 messages were decoded during the battle. Of these 16, only 3 were passed on to Jellicoe, showing the staggeringly bad cooperation between Admiralty staff and Room 40. The Admiralty were not the only ones making mistakes. Major German ships were spotted by the British, and this information was not passed on. other than by Captain Stirling of the destroyer Falkner. He tried to get a message through 3 times, but the British capital ships never received them because all they got was the noise from German Telefunken sets smothering the British signals. The last report that Jellicoe would receive was from HMS Birmingham, which stated that the German High Seas Fleet was on a course parallel to his own. Had Jellicoe been able to receive any of the other messages, he might have been able to change course and catch the German High Seas Fleet before it reached the safety of Horn's Reef. But instead, they slipped it away into the night, hidden beneath the cloud of radio jamming.